And kind of like the goal of this presentation is that not only can you guys learn a little bit about literary criticism and new historicism specifically, but also that everybody can kind of see how vast and different the process of like analyzing and interpreting literature and any kind of media is. And maybe you guys can take some of that away and use it in your own free time whenever you watch movies and stuff. And also, Dr. Cantrell helped me with this a lot. I would not have been able to do this without her. She assisted me all the way. So thank you to her. But there you go. What is literary theory? We got to start at the beginning. Literary theory is the study of how to analyze and interpret a text. And by text, we pretty much mean anything that has words on it. A book, a novel, a letter, in some cases, even like a document or a document can be considered a text. But theorists have created different techniques and theories on how one can properly go about analyzing and then making an interpretation of a text. There's tons of different ways to do it. So a really popular one is structuralism, which whether you realize it or not, you learned when you were in high school, which is basically just you focus on the narrative structure of a book or a novel that you're reading and how that structure specifically ties into the meaning and the theme. But these different theories can all be used to gain different interpretations and meanings from just one text. So let's say you just hate new historicism. It's not for you. Awesome. There's like at least 12 others that you can find when you quick Google search. And maybe one of those speaks to you. But that's cool, but why should you care? Why is this important? As we just mentioned, each different theory has its own different uses and applications. So maybe for one text, structuralism or new historicism might not be the best choice, but you can find a different kind of theory that's going to apply more better for what you are trying to do. As a result, everything also has its own different merits and benefits, as we're saying. But also, all of these ideas that we're going to talk about are applicable beyond just a book, right? If you really like TV, but you're not a big reader, well, that's perfect. You can take all of this and apply it to a TV show, apply it to your video game, anything like that. But what is new historicism? New historicism, also called cultural poetics, the names are interchangeable, but I'm just going to stick to new historicism because that's too confusing. This is part of the wider criticism of historical criticism. Basically, historical criticism is a specific school focused on viewing text through the lens of the historical context of it, right? So, for example, spoiler alert, we're going to be looking at a short story called Young and Brown, which takes place in Puritan America, and it was written in the same time. So, historical criticism is going to want to view it inside the Puritan era and text associated with it, right? But I have kind of a quote that I'm going to say and then explain a little more that kind of explains why people advocate for new historicism specifically, right? The quote says, "All history is subjective, written by people whose personal biases affect their interpretations of the past. History can never provide us with the objective truth or give us a totally accurate picture of the past, nor the worldview of your people." Okay. Basically, what that is saying is that in a text, history within that text is going to be subjective. You can't get a full sense of history based on one thing alone. And so as a result, to get the full history and analysis on something, we're going to view our central text alongside a whole bunch of different other sources that are kind of in relation to it. That's kind of the main idea. So we also have that texts are a product of the culture, government, and institutional systems, as well as the author's views. Whether they intend that or not, that's how it is. All of these things are going to both affect the text and be reflected through it. But new historicism implies that there's an old historicism, right? And that's true. They're the same, cut from the same cloth, but they have some key differences. First, new historicism gives equal weighting to literary and non-literary material. So earlier, when I said that a text is anything with words, new historicists take that literally. A doctor's note or like a spreadsheet from a doctor is going to be just as important as an actual novel to a new historicist. But old historicism is more focused on just those primary text sources like letters and books and that kind of thing. Secondly, new historicism views history as subjective, as we just spoke about. They think that to get full scope of history, we need to do a whole bunch of different stuff. But old historicism is just like, we can just view one thing and get a good enough sense of it. Secondly, new historicism was influenced by other realms of criticism, specifically deconstruction and Marxism. Marxism is kind of the easier one to tell because Marxist theory, both literary and not, is focused a lot on how class, power structures, and governments affect a piece of writing. And we are interested in pretty much the exact same thing here. But deconstruction, you probably don't know what that is if you're not a literature major, and that's okay. I'll forgive you. But basically, deconstruction is a super controversial and new idea at the time that a text cannot have one solid meaning. The author can intend whatever they want, but every single person who reads that book is going to have a different interpretation of it. And we, or the people who made historicism that we're going to get into on the next slide, took that idea and applied it to just history. So a text cannot have one single interpretation of history. But moving on, who are our key theories? What ideas are taken true? And this is in no particular order, but first we have a man with a name that is really hard for me to pronounce. His name is pronounced Michael Foucault. I know it doesn't look like that, that's just how it is. And his main idea is equally hard to pronounce. It's pronounced the episteme. I hope I got that right. And the episteme pretty much says that each period in history, whether that period is right now, a year ago, 10 years ago, or 100 years ago, each different period is going to have different perceptions on what they think is true, what they think is not true, what they think is culturally acceptable, what is unacceptable behavior, and generally just what they think is good and bad. And every single period in history, whether the time difference is a year or 1,000 years, it's going to have a completely different idea on these things. So pretty much that's a really long-winded way to say every single period in history has different cultural values. You can think of it that way, that helps. Clifford Geertz, he kind of has the same idea of talking about how history is affecting our brains, whether we realize it or not. He has thick description and then information gap. Thick description says that there are insignificant details in any one cultural practice. So a good example is you go to church on Sundays, right? In that pastor's sermon, he's going to have a lot of details in there that may or may not contribute to the actual meaning of what he's trying to say, right? There's a lot of excess information in a sermon, just like there is in any single cultural practice. If we compare a cultural practice to other things, we can take out all that excess information and just get straight to the point and avoid any kind of contradiction by having that excess information there. Secondly, he has information gap. And that basically is saying that we, as well as people of any one period of time, are not going to be able to entirely know what happens. So like, I don't know if any of you guys keep a diary, but let's say you just really like my presentation and you wanted to write about it in your diary. I'm on it. But you might say something along the lines of, well, I went to the library and everything in the library was really chill. I went into the room and I listened to the guy talk. Well, you don't know if the library was really chill. You don't know what's going on behind that wall. But since you don't know, you're just going to fill that gap with what you assume happened. And that's probably going to be you assume nothing happened, right? Does that kind of make sense? Okay. Going on, we have Stephen Greenblatt and Stellana Applers. These two are easily the most influential and important figures in New Historicism. Stephen Greenblatt specifically is kind of seen as the father or the founder of New Historicism. And so if we go back, this book here, The Power of Forms in the English Renaissance, written in 1982, was the first time New Historicism was ever mentioned as an idea. But later in the same year, he wrote another book called Genre, which was edited by Applers that worked alongside each other. That was whenever New Historicism was first declared as its own respectable kind of thought. Stuff in the chat room. No, there isn't. I'm just lying. But anyways, these two, pretty much every idea that is not mentioned here that we're going to talk about, these two people came up with together. So those are kind of our four essential theories. But I know I just threw a lot of stuff at you. There it goes. I know I threw a lot of stuff at you, so let's go through the key points of what I'm saying. Let's sum it up. First, literature and history are interwoven. The two things are affecting each other and reflect each other, right? Secondly, a text reflects the episteme, which is just the cultural and social values. The authors use the government and institutional systems, as well as the politics from the time it was written. It both reflects these things and is kind of shaped by it. That's an important distinction. Third, New Historicism is based on parallel readings of literary and non-literary text. So whenever we go about doing an analysis, we're going to gather a whole bunch of different texts that are in relation to our main thing. And finally, new historicists constantly interrogate the relationship between history and literature rather than making dogmatic assertions, which dogmatic assertions is a really strong way to put it. But pretty much what that's saying is new historicists want to look carefully at how different texts interact and the relationship between them, rather than just reading something and assuming it's true. There you go. So let's do a little sample analysis, TLDR. We're going to look at Nathaniel Hawthorne's Young Goodman Brown, which you may or may not have read. You've probably read Nathaniel Hawthorne's other work of The Scarlet Letter in high school. That's super popular, but this is a short story. It's only about 8 pages, but you guys don't want to read all that. It's okay. So I'm going to give you guys a quick summary of it. Young Goodman Brown, which I'm going to shorten to YGB because he has a really long name. He lives at home in Salem, Massachusetts during the Puritan era of America with his wife, Faith. She's said to be aptly named. She represents innocence and purity. And overall, they live great Puritan, Christian, American-bearing lives. Everything is awesome for them. So for whatever reason, young Goodman Brown decides that he's going to travel into the woods in the middle of the night with a mysterious man. And this is all presented as kind of this really dream-like sequence. This is a romantic work, not in the way of it's about love and romance, but it might not appear like it, but it is fictional. There's fantastical elements happening in the story. But they're walking through the woods and they happen upon Brown's religious and childhood mentor named Goody Cloyce. Whenever they see her, she starts freaking out and she points at the mysterious man and says that he's the devil. And he's just kind of like, I don't know why you're so worked up. We know each other and we're going to the same place. He taps her with his walking stick and she disappears. Reasonably, young Goodman Brown decides he's going to turn around and go home. And so the man gives him his walking stick just in case he changes his mind. How thoughtful. And young Goodman Brown starts walking back. On the way back to his house, he sees 2 figures of kind of government importance within Salem. And they're talking about how they're so excited to go to this mysterious meeting place that everybody else is going to. And after seeing this, young Goodman Brown just decides that whatever they're up to is no good. They're probably evil, which is probably fair after he watches his mentor just disappear in thin air. But somehow he sees his wife's ribbons floating down onto a tree branch. And upon seeing this, he declares, "Oh, my faith is gone." And he means that both literally, as now he's figured out his wife is also in the woods right now. And his faith in both his community and his family is all gone. And so he uses the walking stick, magically flies to the woods, and he looks out and he sees a whole bunch of his peers, including his wife, people of the church, people of the government, all at some sort of satanic ritual. It's not entirely clear what exactly is happening, but they are inducting people to worship the devil. This is what we are to assume is happening. Upon seeing this, Brown completely loses his faith, confidence, and trust in his community and the world around him, and he spends the rest of his life really scared, paranoid, and sad. It's not the happiest story, but it is an interesting tale. It is very interesting. But anyways, what are the kind of key things that we can gather from that? First, we've got Puritanism, right? Young Goodman Brown, this Puritan man in the Puritan community, this kind of tests his values as Puritan, and we see how the rest of this community who claim they're Puritans acts. So along the same manner, we've got the themes of religious and spiritual hypocrisy. It's pretty easy to tell that Hawthorne is kind of poking fun at the hypocritical nature that Puritans are often associated with. And the same with, in higher institutions like government. And finally, we watch throughout the story as young Goodman Brown has to define and question how he values ideas like innocence, faith, trust, and family. And we as a viewer are asked, well, what do we hold those values? And do we think other people are true to what they say their values are? But that's the SparkNotes version of young Goodman Brown. But how would a new historicist approach this story, right? Well, the first thing a new historicist would do is identify the key themes in the historical context. You got to read the theme, which we already did that. And I pasted the key themes up here so we can easily reference them. But we've done step 1, we've read the theme, and we've kind of talked about what we think about it. The next step, we're going to want to find some outside texts and sources that are related historically. So some really good texts, like main novels, you've got Nathaniel Hawthorne is also the Scarlet Letter. It's about a lot of the same things. It's about Puritanism, hypocrisy within it, and then a lot of these main values that Puritans hold. Another good one that you might have read is The Crucible by Arthur Miller. That's another real popular one in high school. And they're all about kind of the same essential themes. Also, we have court documents from the Salem witch trials, which those are interesting because the oldest sources might not value those, but in newest sources, we can go and view these transcripts and these just straight documents of what happened, and that is super important to us. And along the same way, we have Puritan sermons. But I have a super nifty website, the Salem Witch Trials Documentary Archive Project. This right here is the newest sources stream. It has everything we could ever want. So like we can come on here and to kind of give you an example of some of the stuff we would look for. Here is tons of records of the actual court documents from the Salem witch trials. And along with court documents, we also have letters. We can go and see all these different letters about things that are happening in the time that we could pull in. And there's even, like, it even has maps. I don't know, I just think this is cool. I don't know how you can tie this in, but here's a map of Salem. But yeah, so that right there, if you can ever find an archival project or website like that about the kind of area of history that you're focusing on, that would be, there's so much good information there. But the final kind of thing that you'd be looking for is the author's perspective in history on not just their own work. If you can find like an article or an interview nowadays about whatever they've written, but also just if you can look at a different work of theirs or at a moment where they speak about the values, that'd be really good. But we've identified our sources, right? So now we're going to want to go about comparing and contrasting. So just kind of briefly, the literary works from the same time, especially ones that mentioned, we're going to have a lot of the same key themes about Puritanism, their values, and we're also going to, especially if we look at sermons, see what values the real Puritans in real life held. And then we can turn around, look at the court trial documents, and see, well, did they really hold themselves to the values they said, or were they more hypocritical about it? I mean, they killed a whole bunch of people just because someone said they went to the woods, right? But also, Hawthorne is a particularly interesting author because if you do really quick research, you're going to find that his grandfather was kind of a main, not juror, a judge. He was the main judge in the real Salem witch trials. And Hawthorne felt so guilty about this that he changed the spelling of his last name to kind of separate himself. And so it becomes pretty apparent by comparing and contrasting that we can make some easy conclusions. The first kind of make conclusion is that Hawthorne deemed society, Puritan society specifically, as hypocritical. That's kind of the apparent one just from reading the story, but we can get kind of an enriched idea and definition of that through viewing the sources. Second, Young Women Brown reflects Puritan beliefs and the historical fears of sin and the devil. I mean, if we look in the witch trials court documents, we're going to see going into the woods at night was enough to get you killed in Puritan society. And that's what our story opens with. And then along the way, Young Women Brown, she shows that there is a genuine fear in him of kind of being associated with sin upon seeing all these people meeting with the devil. And we see these are real fears that are reflected in real life through the Salem witch trials and through his Puritan culture. And finally, Young Women Brown shows how societies can use fear, faith, and trust to control you. Right? At the end of the story, Young Women Brown, he becomes completely disillusioned after he sees all the people at the witch that wouldn't get anything, right? There's certainly an argument whether he joined them or whether he just didn't go at all, if his life would have been better off. But what happened is that because he saw that, he's scared not just of the devil per se, but also of his own neighbor, of his own family. And while you might not necessarily gain that just from reading the short story itself, if you look at these other sources, you can see that there was real fears of, well, what is my neighbor going to say about me if they think something? Or what is my family going to say about me if they associate me with sinful nature, right? There's a real fear that is kind of reflected through Young Women Brown. If I can move on, there we go. Let me check the chat. Oh, you did not see the letters in the maps.
Yeah, that's kind of how I shared it. Sorry, Bill. I can send you the link later.
Yeah, I can.
As well.
I can like type the link in the text chat in a minute if that would help you guys.
There is somebody else wanting to get it though.
Oh,
all right.
Okay. All right, but I know you guys are only going to process about 20% of what I've said in the past 25-ish minutes. So let me give you guys kind of 3 key takeaways and move this out the way so y'all can see that. All right, the first takeaway is that new historicism theorizes that the text can best be interpreted by reading it alongside historically significant events and sources, right? So if you, the next time you watch a movie or read a book, you want to take this approach, let's say you watch Lord of the Rings, look at some other similar fantasy text, things from the time, and maybe compare and contrast ideas with it. You might learn something you didn't before. Second, literary criticism and theory are more than just reading and analyzing a text. I feel like for people not into the arts, you just kind of think, oh, all the literature majors that get there, they read the book and they think really hard about it. And that's not necessarily wrong, I guess, to say. But there's real methods and theories associated with how we go about analyzing and making interpretation of something. And so kind of doing a little bit of research into that, you might be able to enrich your own reading if you're a reader. But the final point that I hope you guys learn is that not just new historicism, but literary criticism and all the ideas within as a whole can be used for more than just books, right? And so like for new historicism specifically, I kind of have some good examples of media I think that would work for to go about and use this process on. Like 1984 would be a good book. You can compare it to real authoritarian government examples and then other dystopian books. The Handmaid's Tale would also probably be a really accessible one for new historicism. But then you've got movies, and especially anything historical, like you can take All the President's Men. Have y'all seen that movie? Yeah. I had to watch it last semester, is why I thought about it. You can take that movie and compare it to the Watergate scandal, is what it's about. You can go compare it to the real like court documents and letters associated with Watergate and maybe other documentaries about it. Or you can take pretty much any World War II movie and compare it to just World War II, right? But this even like you can take this to video games too, like Assassin's Creed or Red Dead Redemption 2. Those would be great video games to associate with their historical ties and compare to other similar media. But that's all that I've got. I did bring this book. If anybody is interested, this is kind of the main source that I use. Very beginning theory. That was kind of the main source that I took a lot of this information from. If anybody's interested, I have the book. So yeah, that's about all that I've got. Thank you.
Thank you to Luke. And you may field questions as needed. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Y'all can look at the audience, apparently, since I didn't get around to changing the camera. I wonder if I can. Yeah, who knows? I don't know if I can figure out how to change the camera. Anyway, I'll figure that out in the future, so it's not going to help you very much. Questions from the audience? Questions from Zoom? Questions from anybody? No? One at a time. My friend.
All pick at once.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like class. Very much like class. I'm going to find that.
It's hyperlinked in on.
Yeah, I saw that. I always mean to share it, so you're just sharing the screen rather than the chosen screen, but there you go. So here, Bill, here's the link to the Salem witch trial. I will put into the chat. If you are curious, not just to Bill, everybody. There we go. All right. There you go. That should load it up. So anyway, back to that. Questions? Thoughts? I mean, I will say that my colleagues know this. I think we've probably aged out of the students on this one. When I used to get to teach my medieval film class, as I had to point out, it was films about the Middle Ages, not from the Middle Ages. But I almost always, I think, took a new historicist approach in the sense that, we would use them as markers of the time and place they were made, right? So if you're watching Robin and Marian from 1976, about the old Robin Hood coming back from the Crusades, you're reading it very much in kind of a post-Vietnam sort of context, So I always found it really, really helpful, as at least for my purposes, as a historian masquerading as a literary scholar. So There you go.
Yeah, I think new historicism is a pretty approachable realm of theory for those who aren't necessarily people who know about literary theory, because it's just super tied to history and what history says about books, and not some crazy abstract idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Since I have the priority or the privilege of being the moderator, I'll ask a point of privilege question. What would you say the down the how do I put it? Like, what are the problems with new historicism? What are the not the restraints, but like what can it not do? What are the downsides?
That's a pretty good question. I think a lot can be told through like the differences between old historicism, because like new historicism focuses on like the equal weight of every single text, right?
Okay.
And so sometimes you might just have a whole bunch of text that necessarily isn't applicable or leads you in the wrong direction because there's so much that you can't approach from. I feel like that's an easy pitfall to fall into.
Okay. And I see Dr. Julian. Yes, I was waiting for you to ask a question. Where'd you go?
I'm sure you were. At first, apologies, I didn't get myself muted.
There you
told
are.
Jamie.
Hold on. I can't hear you though. I can't hear you.
Why
I
not?
can figure out why I can't hear you.
I don't
Why
know.
can't I hear you, Doug?
I don't
For some reason we cannot locate you. Are you still muted? You don't look muted.
No, I think I am muted.
All right. Can you type your question?
Yeah, well.
All right, type your question. I don't know what happened. I can't hear anybody though, so maybe you can hear him on Zoom. What's going on? All right, hold on. Let me see if I can figure out why. Here, maybe this is possible. Try talking again, Doug.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. All right, excellent.
All right. Anyway, I was going to apologize. I couldn't get myself muted off the jump because I'm trying to be everywhere all at once. And the Zoom folks had to suffer through whatever was going on with me making copies and talking to Sam and getting people to the room. Anyway, the question I have is, do you have a sense that new historicism interrupts sort of an aesthetic pleasure of reading? Or do you find that it's sort of do you find it in the moment or after that it heightens it? Or is there anything that sort of just in that initial moment of the pleasure of reading, does new historicism get in your way? And then I will shut up.
I think it's kind of different. It's different for people, but I think for me, it's like twofold, because on one hand, like I could be reading something and I could just immediately kind of point out some similarities between what I'm reading and other similar text. But at the same time, like with doing research, like if you want to do an actual in-depth analysis, you are going to have to go out of your way and do outside research and finding sources. And so I feel like it's kind of both at the same time.
Okay, thank you. As Dr. Billings points out, what Rosenblatt disciples call the aesthetics of reception. Dr. Billings also points out that the approach can also forget about the text, given the rich context. Yeah, and it might be something similar to what Dr. Julian was asking about. I will say, at least from my own experience dabbling poorly in this area, I did have a number of students who would take my film class, really enjoy it, and then complain that it ruined watching films for them. So, yeah, and that is always a danger, when you go too far down that road of only analysis all the time.
Yeah.
All right, other questions? Formalism can do the same thing. Yes, that's 100% accurate. So the lesson we're learning is stay away from literary theory. I kid. We do the same with pop music. Exactly. Yeah, it's in our nature. I used to joke with my students, hey, do you guys like history? And they'd say yes. And I said, I can change that. And that's the end of that. Other questions from the audience? And I will actually be quiet as well.
It's like for every book that you analyze, you have to read a book for fun.
There you go. Right. Yes. Only read something for fun. Dr. Julian, go for it. What do you got?
I will ask one more. So I missed in some ways trying to get on and make copies the beginning. Besides new historicism, what else interests you out of curiosity?
I think honestly, like my favorite realm of theory is honestly deconstructionism, just because I think it's the most interesting. It's really hard to write about, but I think the idea that just like a text is not reliable at all, and so you need to be super mean to it, is really interesting.
As we call pandering to the questioner. Well done. I kid.
Also, Dr. Julian, aren't you teaching this class this semester?
I am.
Are you going to go over new sources a minute?
Yeah, I am making them go through currently, much to Greg's delight, the ancient world and medieval stuff first. So they are currently being subject to Saint Augustine.
Ooh. Oh man.
He's a lot of fun with signs. You kind of, if you really want to play with Derrida, you got to kind of go back to Saint Augustine.
He's got a lot of thoughts, many of which are wrong. But okay, yeah, that's good. Awesome. Other questions from anyone in the audience?
I'm kind of curious, as a historian, do you use literature like on the opposite side?
Yeah, that's a great question, and not just because it was for me. So no, it's funny. And Doug and I used to joke about this a fair bit. He would always say I was an English professor trapped in a history department or such like. But you do see the reverse of this or the reflection of this in history over the last 30 or 40 years. What's called in history is called the new cultural turn, where historians, we hope, started to realize that history wasn't just like official records, archives, databases, and government records and such, but that you could use cultural creations, whether it's film, whether it was music, whether it was literature and all of that, to help understand the period that created it. And so I was lucky enough that my undergraduate was taught by somebody with a medieval studies degree, not a medieval history degree, so he was by nature interdisciplinary. And then my PhD advisor was one of the first medieval historians who used literature a lot to understand the Middle Ages. So yeah, for me, it always made sense that, of course, I could read a 12th century romance, and that tells me something about the 12th century, even if it's fictional. But, like anything, it's always fraught in history. But yes, there is a similar turn in history over the last 30 or 40 years, as you guys have seen in literary studies. All right, any other questions? Oh, yeah, sure.
So,
Paris. Well, it's got an H in it. It's a problem.
I know.
Paris. I thought you literally corrected me every single time I've talked to you, and it's been like 2 years. So one day. Paris. Go for it.
If you information you have, the more it seems more now. So, at what point do you have your original text that you're analyzing? But at what point do you realize, okay, yes, everything is subjective, and like this point of view is this, but like, are you trying to get a more objective view by viewing other texts and trying to evaluate whether that's super reliable?
I would say, yeah, you're pretty on point. And so I do think you also need to be able to kind of evaluate what your stopping point is. Like, you probably don't want to just gather like 7 million outside sources. You probably want to just gather, you want to look at what you found and be like, these are kind of the key ones that best apply to what I'm trying to do. And so like, I'll stop at these 4 or 5 or 6.
So even each individual's way of applying this theory is also subjective then.
Yeah, probably. I would say so. Everybody's going to have their different kind of method going about it. But I think it also just kind of depends on what specifically, if you're trying to do like a specific analysis, or if you're just in general trying to apply new historicism to a text.
Yeah, it's not my presentation, but I love this stuff. I used to tell my students that there was an eminent medievalist who sadly just died, Susan Reynolds. She used to write that you're never going to get history right. You're only ever trying to get it less wrong. And that's that sort of that slippery slope vanishing point that you're never going to get to that end, right? You're always working to try to get it better, realizing you're never going to get it done, right?
Yeah.
And so I always found it very helpful. Other questions? Any other questions before we release them? Okay, that's it. You don't get any more options. That's it. We're done. No more questions. So let's say thank you once more. Well done. And I will get this uploaded to the YouTube where you can watch it again and at your leisure, as it were. And then let me know. Yes, thank you, folks. Let me know if you want to go to that dinner next Thursday, and I will get you on the list. And okay, there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.